in the day-to-day, we won't be able to do that. But again, I would request those who are interested in taking up these themes, I'm sure would be able to do so in the last session. The last point that I want to mention here is in terms of endogeneity in our growth process and growth theories that are important. India in last couple of years has experimented with many new initiatives, particularly the idea of financial inclusion and bringing in Jan Dhan and many other schemes. The recently released data is very clear that 54% of the Mudra loan which have been extended to women who are first-time bank account they have opened under the Jan Dhan scheme. So this shows the financial inclusion that India is moving ahead with, and these experiments, if collated together, would provide the necessary frameworks that we need. And yesterday, in two different sessions, in two different contexts, the idea of norm setting and our approach to justice came up. So if we are working on the issues related to global justice, if we are focusing on issues related to the idea of right to development that Arjun Sengupta stood for, I think it's also important for South Asia to bring back that proposition, as some of us are entering into this zone with higher economic growth and our commitment for regional integration. The issue here is also important when South Asia is also turning into this place for great game, as we saw in case of Central Asia. So more and more of our actors from the global scenario are focusing on or around waters of our region. It is important for the regional actors not just to focus on trade in isolation, but also in the larger global settings. I'm sure we have a very rich and very hectic day ahead. And I must thank UNSCAP for partnering with RIS and for SESEPS for their regional leadership, and for all those who stayed back on the third day after extremely hectic 2 days. So I wish we would have a very enriched agenda when we would close today evening. Thanks once again. Thank you.
So with this, we come to a close of the inaugural session. Once again, I express our gratitude to all the distinguished panelists. And we would now have a group photo and then break for coffee. And we would come back in another 15 minutes or so. Welcome to all the panelists, and over to you, sir, for leading us in this session.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, as I heard Sachin saying that most of you have been engaged in 2 days of strenuous brainstorming on South Asian issues. And now we are more focused on three areas identified by the organizers. Let me first begin by thanking the organizers for creating this panel and giving me the opportunity of moderating this discussion. We do not have a lot of time with us, and we have 8 panelists here. And therefore, we need to make good use of their capacities and expertise. And therefore, what I propose to do is bring up a few questions and raise them with a specific panelist. to respond, because I think if you all start speaking, then even the entire forenoon will be less for us. So now we are meeting today in a global backdrop where huge amount of churning is happening. There are questions around the multilateral trading system. There are questions around unilateralism. And we have seen the emergence of unilateralism not necessarily coming from the United States, but also happening on the East in different ways. You have the Trumpomania, which is giving you high tariffs on specific products, value chain getting affected, and therefore no one is really left out unimpacted by what Mr. Trump is doing. On the other hand, you have initiatives which essentially have been, well, marketed as infrastructure initiatives for global integration, but there is a certain amount of unilateralism there. And we need to understand, where do we figure in all this? So my first question is actually on this backdrop. I would like to know from some of the panelists, and I'll pick up Mr. Salim Rehan for this, first of all, because that's the way we are positioned here. I mean, how does he look at the emerging global trade scenario in the context of what is happening in the US and what's been the responses coming out from different other trading partners of US? And how do you position in the context of the impact and the potential responses to that impact in South Asia? Mr. Rehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is an excellent opportunity to share ideas and views here. I fully agree with you. The changing global scenario is actually impacting quite a lot in the countries in South Asia, and they have to devise their own strategy, trade and investment policies, how to deal with these changing, emerging global scenarios. And also the way the South Asian countries, they are at different developmental stage, that is also being kind of, would be related to how they deal with these issues. But I think when I look at the kind of the process, as a region in South Asia, it emerged, and the way if it wants to really respond these emerging global challenges as a region, I see there are several weaknesses, and I think we have discussed this quite a lot over the last 2 days, and this morning too, eminent speakers, they talked quite a lot about the challenges in South Asia when it comes to work as a region, rather than as a kind of in isolation, the individual countries face these global challenges. I think when it comes to these the regional challenges, to deal with the global challenges, I think we have already heard about quite a lot about these tariff issues, non-tariff issues, trade cost, high trade cost, and then huge structural imbalance in this region, like in the sense India is at the center, which occupies more than 70% of GDP, population, and it's a landmass. So it's a kind of, we don't see this kind of feature in any other part of the world, which actually shows that India has to take a major lead. If you just, it's not just the size factor. How do you translate into, a kind of region to respond the region as a whole? I think India has to play a due role. But keeping in mind these things, I think if we just approach these problems in a mechanical way, there is probably, we discussed quite a lot about how to deal with this. When you look at the SDGs, in this global changing scenario, I think the first and foremost, probably the response is very much mechanical. We have to address these goals, in these, achieve these targets and this and that. But I think there are two fundamental issues which are behind, behind this mechanical kind of stuff. And I think these are something missing in our all discussion. With the chair's due permission, I just very quickly go on to these two fundamental issues. I think unless and until we get these two fundamental issues correct, as a region will fail to actually respond to these emerging global challenges. First is, of course, I think there is a kind of lack of convergence of developmental policies in South Asia. What we see, 8 countries, they probably move into different directions in terms of, when it comes to investment policy, when it comes to trade policy, when it comes to different other development policies, which we don't really see in Southeast Asia or East Asia. So this is something very important. And I think here comes the SDGs, which has given us a prime opportunity to really kind of converge our developmental policy to come to an agreement. And second, I think, which we talk probably quite a lot about political will in South Asia. How do we really challenge, or how do you handle these challenges? But I think if we put these things together, what I understand that there is a serious problem of political settlement at the regional level. We actually had a political settlement that really led to emergence of SARC, that really led to signing of SAFTA, and starting from 1985 until 2006, I think that political settlement helped us to reach up to a certain point, but that political settlement is broken. Now we need to really get into that political settlement, new political settlement, and I can see that SDG is the prime opportunity to, as I say, two challenges what you can meet. First, convergence of development policy, and second, to reach a new political settlement where we can actually, as a region, we can work together and face these global challenges. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rehan. That's you summarized the essence of the approach that we need to take. Let me move to Dr. Pandey, and he has been, I am essentially drawing from what Dr. Rehan said. This has been a usual take from the South Asian trade particularly, that we have been talking about integration, and unfortunately the intra-regional trade in terms of its percentage remains more or less static. On the contrary, in the global headwinds, we also see that some of the countries have been actually, if not going down, they remain more or less where they were. In terms of bilateral trade, India, Bangladesh seems to be the only rising star, but elsewhere we have been more or less, stagnating or growing at not a very encouraging speed. So what do you see as a potential possibility for the South Asian countries in terms of institutional dimension of this relationship? See, we are, and this is my perspective, that we have too many institutional formats in the region, and obviously they have been necessitated because of the way the political evolution has taken place. But how do you look at, you have BIMSTEC, you have SARC, you have BBIN formation, you have bilateral agreements that India has with many countries, and you also have regional, and so on and so forth. And then you have some other regional agreements where some of the South Asian countries are members. Do you think this multiplicity of institutional engagements is holding us back in a sense that we are not able to put all our might behind a single institutional mechanism and then really working it up for the benefit of the region? Or do you think that there is some other institutional possibilities are afloat and we need to subscribe to them?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, we are, members of various bilateral, mechanism, regional institutions, and others. We have developed other mechanism as well. But here the fundamental, the fundamental problem is the same. Like, when you talk about BIMSTEC or you talk about SARC, or maybe, in some other bilateral relation, here the major player is India. When you talk about BIMSTEC, more than 75% of the GDP, India contributes in BIMSTEC. Similar is the case in SAFTA. So, we should not take, all these institutions as alternative. But, one institutions can complement the activities of other. And so let's look at, what is the fundamental, issues. Here the problem is we have some sort of, trust deficit. Trust deficit in the sense, if you look at SARC, we have some complicated history. And another factor, including in BIMSTEC, we have asymmetry in size. So that give rise to some sort of mistrust and some sort of suspicion. And another factor, whether it is in BIMSTEC or in SARC, there is trade deficit. I mean, all the member countries in SARC, they have trade deficit with India. And similar is the case even in case of BIMSTEC. So the problem, I mean, is it possible, I mean, to correct, I mean, that scenario of trade deficit? There are less developed countries compared to India, and they don't have any productive capacity. Their economy is not diversified, so they won't be able to increase their exports. So I see, I mean, the minimum prospects, I mean, given under this existing scenario, minimum prospects for reducing, I mean, trade deficit. So that is another, I mean, issue, fundamental issue in all institutions. And the third one is